pals, I'm here today to talk about the book Longlist for 2024. So it was announced a couple of days ago, and this is the first chance I've had to film a reaction to the list. So I am not going to talk in detail about what each of these books is about, although we'll touch on that briefly. Mainly what I'm going to do in this video is talk about my feelings about each book on the list specifically, but then about the list more broadly at the end. So I've sort of grouped these books into, I think, 6 categories. The first category is 3 books that I've either read to completion or attempted to read and then given up on. The first one is The Safekeep by Yael van der Hoeden. I read this in the last few weeks. I really enjoyed it. It's definitely in the top 10 best books I've read so far this year. I think if you enjoy Sarah Waters' writing, you'll really enjoy this book. It's in 1961 in a rural Dutch province. It's about a woman who lives alone in her family home after her mother has passed away, and one of her brothers delivers this new girlfriend he has, who very quickly has become his fiancée, to the house and says, I need you to look after her for a few weeks. And yeah, tensions immediately rise and kind of escalate because our protagonist is incredibly paranoid and thinks that everybody who enters the house is there to steal something. The book is incredibly sensual. The writing is very sexy, and I thought this one was excellent. So I didn't include this in my wish list video for kind of 2 reasons. One, I hadn't reviewed it yet, and so I didn't really want to talk about a book I hadn't fully reviewed. And 2, I didn't think this would make the book a long list. This felt like a book that would be more likely to make a historical fiction long list, but I was wrong, and I'm very glad to be wrong in this case because I think she really deserves all the accolades for this one. Same cannot be said for the next one, which is Enlightenment by Sarah Perry. Now, I read The Essex Serpent by this author years ago and loved it. I've reread it on audio since then and still loved it. But I attempted to go back and read her first book and I DNF'd it. I read her third book, Melmoth, and really didn't enjoy it. Then I pre-ordered this new one, read it all the way through, and I wish I DNF'd it. It was a 2-star read for me in the end. I will link the video above where I spoke about this one. Kind of doesn't surprise me that this has made the book a long list because it kind of feels like one of those books of ideas. Throughout a lot of this book, the writing on a sentence by sentence level is incredibly strong. This is a contemporary novel, but Sarah Perry's writing always kind of feels like it's set in a Victorian time period because of its kind of, it feels really voluptuous and rich and kind of decadent. And so in that case, this book is very strong, but I thought that there's 2 protagonists, one of which is a young woman sort of growing up. I thought she was very kind of tropey and flat, manic pixie dream girl type character. And I also thought the book was a bit messy and also kind of uninteresting at a lot of points. So that was a real disappointment for me. And I kind of feel indifferent about it making the list. The next one is Headshot by Rita Bullwinkle. I read about a third of this one. I think I read sort of 70 pages. This is a set of interconnected short stories set in the US about an all-girls boxing tournament. And I read each short story is a different match. And I read the first 2 matches. And in the first match, I kind of was really pulled in by this. And I thought the writing was really interesting. I thought the way in which she wrote about their bodies and the way in which she used this kind of premonition style writing where we were in the present moment of their fight, but she also told you what happened to them when they became older women. I liked that. And then in the second story, it was just much of the same. And then, also this kind of weird narrative device was being used that I really didn't like. And I just felt like this would have been strong as like a single short story, one and done. And I wasn't interested in carrying on. And I also didn't feel at all connected to the characters. So would rather a different book had made the list, but it is what it is. Then, out of the remaining 10 books, so there's 13 books on the long list, there are 3 books that I wanted to read and was intending to get to before the end of this year. Those 3 books are Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange. I previously read There when it came out, and this is somewhat of a follow-on. I think Wandering Stars can be read without reading There, and I'm hoping it can be read without rereading There because I don't really have the time for that. Now, I enjoyed There. I thought that it was definitely overrated in terms of the kind of public reception to it. I didn't think it was like a 5-star read. But I think a lot of what people were excited about is that we don't often hear about the urban experience when talking about Native Americans. And I think that was really what Tommy Orange was bringing to the forefront. As in There, I understand Wandering Stars is kind of a collection of voices, which is something I really enjoy. And so, yeah, I was intending to get to this one. I've been waiting for my library to buy a copy, which they now have. The next one, and this is one I did include on my wish list, and the only one I ended up making the list, is Wild Houses by Colin Barrett. This is an Irish novel, and it is about a group of I think small-time criminals who are, I think, drug dealers, and some police officers who are investigating them, and it kind of follows this group of characters, and I think it's maybe kind of dark and, yeah, a bit of a wild ride. So I definitely wanted to read that one. I was planning to listen to that one on an audiobook because it has, a kind of really great narrative voice on audio. And then the third one, and I have borrowed this from the library previously in the year, and just knew I wasn't going to have time for it, so returned it, but intended to borrow it again, is My Friends by Hisham. This is his debut novel, although he previously wrote a memoir, I think called The Return, which I heard great things about. Yeah, I really like the sound of this one. This is about two Libyan men who I think meet at Edinburgh University, and you sort of follow them through the years. And I think it's about kind of one moment, I think during like a protest or an uprising, at which their life is kind of irreversibly changed, and you follow their story. And yeah, the segments of this book that I sampled, I thought the writing was really strong, and I was really pulled in by this narrative. I think it's quite interesting for me and unlikely that the 3 books I was planning to read from the list were written by men, because if you watch my channel, you may have noticed that I read very few books by men. 85 to 90% of what I read is by women. I was going to say that isn't intentional. It kind of is intentional, but also and what I mean by intentional is I'm just more interested in women's stories, but I read a lot of stories about women, and I prefer to read from an own voice's perspective. So I intentionally avoid books about women written by men. But yeah, in all these cases, I think we're following predominantly male characters. So yeah, I was interested in all 3 of those already. So now we're moving on to the books that I wasn't planning to read. And there's 2 that I wasn't planning to read, but I am more than happy to read since seeing them longlisted. One of them in particular is Held by Anne Michaels. I was aware this book existed. I knew what the cover looked like, but I hadn't looked into it. I think that's the case for a lot of bookish people. You kind of know of a book, but you haven't read the blurb. I really like the sound of this one. This is a war narrative, I believe. I'm going to get up. I've reserved all the books I need to read. I've reserved the library except for 2 that I'm going to audio, and I'll touch on that at the end. And what's really good about my library app is they have really short blurbs, which is very handy when you want to just kind of succinctly say what a book is about. So for Held, it says, 1917, on a battlefield near the river Escaut, John lies in the aftermath of the blast, unable to move or feel his legs. Struggling to focus his thoughts, he is lost to memory. A chance encounter in a pub by a railway, a hot bath with his lover on a winter night, his childhood on a faraway coast as the snow falls. 1920. John has returned from war to North Yorkshire, near another river, alive but not still whole. Reunited with Helena, an artist, he reopens his photography business and endeavours to keep on living. But the past erupts insistently into the present as ghosts begin to surface in his pictures, ghosts whose messages he cannot understand. So begins a narrative that spans 4 generations, moments of connection and consequence igniting and reigniting as the century unfolds. I think that sounds really interesting. I like books that are kind of snippets of memory. I'm slightly concerned about it saying that it spans 4 generations, because I don't like books that are kind of distantly focused, and this book is only 220 pages. That's a lot to do in a short time period, but I am interested in this historical time period, so I am intrigued by this one and think it could be one I really enjoy. The next one is Orbital by Samantha Harvey. Now, I've previously read The Western Wind by this author. Ultimately, I think I ended up giving that book 3 stars, but I really love the writing style. I thought the writing style was really excellent. I just thought that some of the plot points weren't executed excellently. But yeah, I always intended to kind of keep an eye on her as an author. This one's only 136 pages, and I heard a lot of people mention this as a contender for the long list, so I don't think this one's a big surprise. I don't know, yeah, I'm interested in this because I've read another Samantha Harvey book and enjoyed it, and in particular enjoyed her writing. But I felt so about the premise of this. This is about 6 astronauts in space, and a lot of the time I would pick that type of book up if written by a literary fiction author because I'm interested in reading more sci-fi and fantasy and stuff. But I was a bit concerned when I read the kind of back end of this blurb, which is that it says the fragility of human life fills their conversation, their fears, their dreams. So far from Earth, they have never felt more part or protective of it. And I was a bit worried this book could end up being like a bit vague and like philosophical, which are things I do not enjoy. But like I said, I have read another book by this author and enjoyed her writing style. And yeah, it was still one I was kind of intending to pick up, but just wasn't really in any rush to do so. The next set are 2 books that I heard pretty much everyone include on their predictions. I mentioned in my predictions video that there were 3 books that I was pretty confident would make the long list, but I wasn't interested in them. And 2 of them have made the long list. And so, yeah. Those books are James by Percival Everett and This Strange Eventful History by Claire Masood. So, I've heard everybody rave about James. I've had a couple of people say they thought it was like excellent in terms of craft, but didn't enjoy it as much as they admired it. But everyone else I've heard say it's just like amazing on every level. There's a couple of reasons I didn't want to read this book. One is that I know nothing about Huckleberry Finn. My understanding is this is a kind of reimagining of Huckleberry Finn from the perspective of a character who in the book is called Jim, and he is a African-American man who is kind of guiding Huckleberry Finn. So yeah, I'm just a bit concerned that I'll lose a lot of the nuances because I know so little about Huckleberry Finn. Although I've heard people say it doesn't really matter. I don't know. And secondly, I'm aware that Percival Everett is known as a brilliant satirical writer, and I don't love satire in books. I tend to find that when a book is satirical, I feel kind of held at a remove. The comedy kind of holds me at a remove from the characters, and if you've been here for any length of time, you know that I hate that. I love books where I feel really close to the characters, whether I like them or not, and I want to feel like I really know them and really feel for them. So those were my kind of concerns about this one. And This Strange Eventful History, I just thought sounded incredibly boring. It's a very big book. A lot of the books on the list are actually fairly short. There's a lot of books around the 200-page mark. This book's close to 500 pages, and I think it's about this author's own family history. I think it spans different countries in a very long time period. Yeah, and I was fearful that when I read the blurb, I just thought it sounded a little bit dry. And again, I am fearful of books that span a really long length of time. I'm absolutely fine if they just jump. So if there's just a segment in like 1920, a segment in 1940, a segment so on. But if they try and cover the intervening years and like wrap them up in a couple of paragraphs, I hate that because I again feel like I'm just kind of like reading a fable. I feel very removed from it. So I'm just hoping it doesn't go that route. If you've read the book, let me know. Then we have the last 3, and this is quite amusing. These last 3, I have read or attempted to read books from all 3 of these authors and not had great success. But if I hadn't, then on premise alone, I'd want to read all 3 of these books. So I think it's kind of ironic. So yeah, those books are Stoneyard Devotional by Charlotte Wood. My understanding is that this is about a woman who kind of leaves her life and ends up at a convent or a nunnery or something like that. And yeah, it's kind of living this life there. That's about as much as I know about it, but that would be enough to make me want to read it. This book that focuses on this space inhabited by women and someone just kind of uprooting their life. I find all that fascinating. But I've previously read a book by this author, and when I think of books that I kind of really disliked and still feel annoyed at, this is one that always comes to mind, and that is The Natural Way of Things. I read this book back in 2016 and I'm still annoyed at it. 8 years it's been. And that book, loads of people loved. I thought that it was a book that was badging itself as deeply feminist and actually felt the opposite to me in terms of its portrayal of women. I found it, just kind of frustrating, unbelievable. There was some repeated metaphors and repeated imagery that I found annoying. So yeah, really unsuccessful book for me. And frustratingly, every book Charlotte Wood has released since The Natural Way of Things has sounded like a book I would like to read. All of her books really do centre women, which is, my primary concern when reading. So yeah, perhaps she does deserve a second chance. Then the next one is Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner. I hadn't even heard of this. I think this is one of the books that isn't quite out yet. I think this one comes out in September, although my library do already have it available to reserve. This is just over 400 pages, so it's one of the longer books on the list. Now, I previously read, because it was longlisted on the Booker Prize, The Mars Room by this author. And elements of that book I loved. It's set in a women's prison and you follow this group of really interesting characters. And yeah, I kind of really enjoyed all that. I thought the dialogue was great, but the book, plot-wise, I thought it got really messy and I thought she just lost her grip on it towards the end. So it ended up being a kind of mid-read for me. Then I tried to read her essay collection called The Hard Crowd. A couple of essays I really enjoyed, and then I found myself just feeling bored and like it was kind of repetitive, so I DNF'd it. So I have a kind of weird relationship with Rachel Kushner. However, this also sounds like a book I would like to read. We follow this woman who is an American undercover agent of ruthless tactics, bold opinions, and clean beauty. She is sent by her mysterious but powerful employer to a remote corner of France. Her mission to infiltrate a commune of radical eco-activists influenced by the beliefs of a mysterious elder who has rejected civilization. And it says, as she lives there and kind of believes herself to be above all this and apart from it, she starts to fall under this man's spell and his own sort of tragic story, and she starts to kind of fall for the ideas of this commune. I think that sounds really interesting. I think a lot of us are interested in communes and cults and those type of kind of insular communities. I'm particularly interested when they have kind of like an eco bent, because that's something I'm very interested in personally. So yeah, I think this one sounds intriguing. Kind of not sure how I feel about there being this possible romance element. I could do without that, but we shall see. And then lastly, we have Playground by Richard Powers. So this, again, is an interesting one. I tried to read The Overstory by Richard Powers because everyone loved it. And I love trees. I love books about multiple characters. I love books with multiple timelines in them. All those things, which is what The Overstory does. I read the first section of The Overstory and then I sampled a couple of the voices from the later sections to see if I was sure I wanted to give up on this book. And give up I did. And that's because, and I'm really bad at describing this type of writing, but I found that The Overstory had that voice that's kind of distinctly like big American author voice, where I am entirely aware that I'm being told a story and I feel really held at a kind of remove from said story. And yeah, it reminded me a little bit, although I did much prefer the writing style in this one, but did also DNF it, of like The Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. That kind of great American novel, kind of zoomed out focus, and yeah, I just don't like that at all. And it's also, in particular, when written from a male author's perspective, I read it and kind of feel frustrated at the idea that like this is what we think is an excellent novel, because it just feels kind of dated to me that this is still what we, hold up as the best of the best. So yeah, not feeling great about there being a Richard Powers book on the long list. However, were I to read this blurb and not know it was written by Richard Powers, I would want to read it. This is a very short blurb. Playground follows 4 lives: a marine biologist, an artist, a school teacher, and an AI pioneer. They intersect on an island in French Polynesia when it is chosen as a base for seasteading, humanity's next great adventure. So I think this is maybe another like eco-focused book, perhaps set in the near future, following multiple characters. And that sounds fascinating. And perhaps I would have been more willing to continue with the Overstory if it wasn't so long, and this one is just over 200 pages. So yeah, we shall see. So overall, I feel kind of okay about this long list, just in terms of my excitement to read these books. Like I said, there's one I've already loved, there's 3 I was really excited to read, and then out of a lot of the others, I have kind of mixed thoughts in that there's a lot of authors I'd read before and not liked, and then a couple of books I wasn't that interested in. But in general, I feel interested in the stories of these books, okay? So if I didn't know about the author's writing styles, then other than James and This Strange Eventful History, I'm intrigued by the premise of these books. It's just when you add the author's name that I'm less intrigued. How I feel about the list other than that is kind of disappointed. The list is dominated by large publishers, dominated by large names, dominated by authors who have multiple books out. There isn't many debut authors on the list. And my biggest disappointment with the list is just the diversity in terms of the types of voices we have. So for a few years now, the Booker Prize has allowed American authors on the list. Before that, the list was open to, or the prize I should say, was open to authors from the UK and authors from any Commonwealth countries. And I think when that was the case, we got to see a much more diverse list in terms of the countries of origin of the authors longlisted. I think since Americans have been eligible, we see a lot of Americans, and this is one of those years. 6 of the books on the list are written by American authors, 6 of the 13, and it just kind of disappoints me. And what I find especially frustrating about this is that, you know, the couple of really big prizes in the US, book prizes, the National Book Award and the Pulitzer, are only open to American writers. And yet in the UK, our 2 biggest prizes, which are probably the Booker and the Women's Prize, are open much broader. And it just feels like, to me, America is getting way more bites at the apple than any other country in terms of the bookish prizes they're eligible for. And I just find that kind of frustrating. I'm someone who reads a lot of books by American authors, and I included loads of books by American authors in my wish list because I knew that they tend to hog the list these days. Yeah, but I just can't find that kind of frustrating. I also think there's a real lack of diversity in terms of ethnicity on the list. I think about 3/4 of the list are written by white authors. And yeah, I just think it's a bit of a shame. So out of the 13 books, 6 are by American authors. One of those American authors is a Native American author, and he's the first Native American longlisted, although of course they haven't been eligible for many years. And we have 1 Dutch author, first Dutch author to make the list. My understanding is she wrote the book in English and it's been translated back into Dutch to be published in the Netherlands. And we have 1 Australian, 1 Canadian, only 1 Irish author, which I think was the biggest shock of the list, that we were all expecting to see 3 or 4 Irish authors. They are doing amazing on the prize list lately, but also there's just a ton of eligible Irish books this year that have been getting like great reviews. So that was kind of surprising. And then there's 3 British authors on the list. Now, it doesn't bother me that there's only 3 British authors on the list for a British prize. Like, that doesn't bother me at all. I would rather see a diverse list than a list that has a lot of British authors on it. But it does bother me that it feels like the 6 American authors on the list kind of prevent authors from other countries making the list. Do not have a Nigerian author on the list. There's no one from the Caribbean. And I think that happened much more before we let American authors on the list as well. So yeah, I'm feeling a bit peeved at that, I guess. But my intention, I think, is to try to read the list. Again, as a comment on a lot of these books being big names, big publishers, my library has every single one of these books. That's rare. Usually, when the long list comes out, I'm scrabbling to get my library to buy the books from small presses, and that has not been the case this time. For a lot of these books, in fact, my library owns multiple copies because they're from such big authors. So I'm going to listen to James and Wild Houses on audio. I sampled the audio of James and thought it was excellently narrated, and I think I'll have much more chance of enjoying the book if I listen to it. And you know, it's incredibly rare for me to read an Irish book and not listen, because I think you know, just obviously there's many distinct accents within Ireland, but yeah, I sampled this one, and again, brilliant. And all the others my library has, so I've requested them all. Obviously a couple aren't out yet, so I've sort of put them on pre-order at the library, and I will be reading them as they come in, and I am intending to do a video where I rank and review all 13 books. Now, a little bit tricky because I have my summer TBR that I'm still working my way through, which I'll link above. I have a couple of books I've recently treated myself to that were pre-orders that I'm so excited for. And I would also like to read the 6 books that I gave 5-star predictions to and get that video up in the next couple of months. So things are going to be a bit chaotic, a bit manic, not sure how quickly I'll manage to read this long list. And in all honesty, I'm not promising anything. If I start reading these books and just feel like they're all a bit rubbish, then I'll lose trust in this long list and I'll probably give up. So yeah, I'll keep you updated as I go along. I would love to know your thoughts on everything I've just discussed. Yeah, thoughts on specific books, but also broader thoughts on the long list. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.